Welcome to Business Legal Lifecycle TV, the live TV show all about the legal aspects of your business to help educate you on complex legal terms in an easy to understand manner, to help understand why you need to do certain things in your business from a legal point of view, and to help you develop a plan for the future. Our mission at Business Legal Lifecycle is to help empower all small to medium-sized businesses around the world to get access to legal advice so that they can help build their communities and make the world a better place.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Business Legal Lifecycle TV. Today is show 173, and we're looking at investing in property, which is a great stage in your business and the life cycle of it when you get to a point where you can use some of the money that you've been getting through your business to invest in property. As always, I have with me the author of the Business Legal Lifecycle, both in Australia and in the UK, Jeremy Stretton. Say hello to everyone, please, Jeremy.
Hi everyone, hope you're having an awesome day.
Excellent. So, as I said, investing in property. Jeremy, do you want to explain where that sort of fits into the life cycle and exactly what it is we're talking about today when it comes to investing in property?
Yeah, so as you say, Craig, this is the phase where you basically get your hard-earned cash and you start investing it into really in assets. We pick property because lawyers get involved in investing in property. It could equally also be investing in shares or investing in other businesses if that's what you want to do, although hopefully you've done that in the phase 7, which is all about expansion, franchising, licensing and buying other businesses. So investing in property is really taking, as Craig said before, taking your hard-earned cash and investing that in something that's going to generate you income. Hopefully, as best as it can be, passive income. I think that's, there's probably never actually a thing as passive income, but because you're going to do some work in it. But as best you can, investing in property is basically putting money aside to actually, invest in something that's going to help earn you money outside your business. So what is it? For those watching, see, I'll put the slide up there. Phase 9, it comes after estate planning, it comes after expansion. And this is really when you're getting the cash from your business and you're investing in property or shares that will help you reach a return in the process. So today we're going to talk about 4 different topics. We're going to talk about the process of investing in property, and that's going to be really focused on the Australian and Queensland process. But as Craig said, I've authored a book in the UK about this. The process isn't very different over there, and I can reveal, we're recording this in February 2019, and right here I have the first draft of the US edition of the Business Legal Lifecycle, which I was working on very early this morning, Craig, to get that going. And the process really isn't that different, especially in UK, US, even Canada, the countries that are formed from British law. The process of investment is very similar. And we'll do other interviews. I've already done an interview with Nigel Clark, who was the lawyer that we partnered with in the UK to write the UK version of the book. The US lawyer, Keith Chauncey, will no doubt be interviewing him at some point in the future about the differences in US law. They're really similar. It's remarkable just how similar it actually is. So even if you're not in Australia, this process that Craig's going to go through is really, really relevant to you, because whilst the actual execution and the laws might be different, the effect of it is essentially the same. Then I'm going to talk about the different types of property, and there we're going to go through the basically 5 different types of property. Again, these are really similar in most Western countries, even countries that aren't based on the UK law. They're really, really similar. So then the next one is that Craig's going to talk about what you need to do before you sign a contract. And there are different rules. Some of the rules are similar in different places, but again, the concepts are the same. And as I said earlier, and as I showed you, this version of the book, it's quite thick, but the actual effective changes are not that different, and even in what you do before you sign. So then I'm going to wrap up with due diligence. So really, I'd encourage you, yes, the specific, anything specific we're going to talk about is going to be based on Australian law, and particular Queensland law. We're going to try and keep it general because the changes that you go through and what the actual process you go through is very similar no matter where you are. So, Craig, I think that's probably enough of what is it and phase 9. So do you want to kick into the process?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So, as Jeremy said, this is sort of the broad process when you're investing and purchasing a property. The first thing you need to look at is finding the particular property that you want to buy. So, depending on your strategy, will depend on what sort of property it is. So, you need to go out there and do your research into the property. It's also a good idea to talk to a number of different real estate agents. And even if you wanted to consider a buyer's agent, so they will basically, as part of these steps, go out there, find the property. We'll need to talk to them about exactly what you want. They'll have some properties probably already on their books that might be available. So talk to a real estate agent, talk to a buyer's agent about finding the property. So once you've found the particular property that you are interested in, the second step in the process we encourage everyone to do is actually inspect, and that's a visual inspection of the property. So an open house or whatever it might be, or a private inspection. Seems pretty obvious. Some people don't inspect the property when they're investing in property because they don't really care, I guess, from the aesthetic point of view as to what the property looks like. But it's a good idea to conduct a visual inspection to make sure you're getting what you think you're getting, and don't wait till there's a problem to go out there and check it out and say, oh, okay, I didn't realise that was the case. So make sure you do a visual inspection. So once you've gone through that, and you decide that you want to buy that property, the seller will now be looking at you for an offer to buy the property. So if it's by private treaty, then there'll be a negotiation process. If it's an auction, obviously, then you need to attend the auction, and your offer is essentially your highest bid. If you hopefully get to that point, so you're making an offer, and there might be conditions to that offer, and that's where you need to seek the advice of a professional about what conditions there should be. Particularly if you're buying at an auction, then you may not be able to have any conditions, so you will need to think about a building and pest inspection prior to the auction. So hopefully you've made the offer, and they will now come back to you as to whether or not they're going to accept it. Obviously, they may have some other offers, etc., etc. They're happy with the price. There might be some back and forth negotiating with the price or the terms to that particular offer that you made, or the building pest or finance or whatever it might be of their conditions. So they'll agree to accept the offer, and then you have the signing of the particular clauses, etc. At that point, you should appoint a lawyer or a conveyancing firm to handle the particular transaction. And as I said before, you may have a lawyer involved in some of the earlier steps to negotiate or to make sure that the terms of the contract are as you want. Normally then, if you haven't bought a property at an auction, you bought it outside of that, there'll be a period of time where you can do, depending on the conditions under the contract, do some form of due diligence. And that's an important step in the process to make sure you check out the property, do the relevant searches, all those sorts of things to make sure that you're getting what you paid for and there's no skeletons in the closet. So you want to make sure you do your due diligence. If it's a residential property, most of the time that's a building and pest inspection. If it's a commercial property or some other investment that's not just your standalone house, then there'll probably be other due diligence type actions that you're looking into. But pretty important step. The next step after that is once you've passed the due diligence, your conveyancer or solicitor will be bearing the actual transfer and transaction document. So that's where they're prepared, and that's the documents lodged with the relevant body so that the property is transferred into your name. That's not done, obviously, until a few more steps, and that's actually money changing hands, but the transfer documents are done normally at that point. There will be some changes to the price that is changed hands, so there'll be an adjustment to the rates, the water usage, etc., etc. So the way that works is that Obviously, if you sign a contract on the 1st of February and you don't settle that property until the 28th of February, the seller, depending on how it is going about it, may still be in there using the water, electricity, and might be collecting rent, all those sorts of things. And that's adjusted accordingly. So you essentially don't pay their water bill for the month that they're in the property, for instance. So that's all adjusted, and then a price is determined at that stage. The next step, obviously, is to actually have the transaction settled. So the money changes hands at that point. There's releases of mortgage, etc., and along the way, those transfer documents I spoke about in the earlier step are then lodged with the relevant body, and the property is now in your particular entity name. And after that, there's a few other steps. If it's a body corporate, so it's a unit, they're notified, etc., and all the details are updated. Keys are handed over, etc., etc. So you need to talk to your conveyancer or lawyer about where you're getting the keys from. It might be from the real estate agent. Deposits are released, etc., etc. And then you will have the property in your name or in your entity that you've decided on. If you've listened to earlier shows, we've spoken about the structures, and that's where you'd be thinking about exactly what that's going to be. So that is generally or broadly the process, and as Jeremy said, most of those steps are relevant to wherever you might be buying property. Important to get the advice, do your due diligence, etc., and hopefully you get a good buy and negotiate well. So that's the process, Jeremy. Do you want to talk about the different types of property?
Yeah, so this is a really important one, and the reason it's important is because the process Craig just went through really depends and can be adjusted based on the different types of property that you might buy, because there are different searches. And I'm going to talk about due diligence at the end, which is the inspection of the property, and that also really ties in to the different types of property and the things that you might want to see. So as I said in the intro, there are 5 different types of property. There's residential property, there's industrial property, there's commercial property, there's rural property, and there's retail shop property. So in our view, there are these 5 different types of property that you can buy and that all the countries I mentioned before definitely have. Residential property is by far and away the most common type of property and most often that's transacted. It can be a house and land, it can be a unit, it can be a townhouse, but essentially, a residence is where a family live in. Now, the family, obviously, that own it doesn't necessarily have to live in the property. There are investment properties, but essentially residential property is where a person or persons or a family reside, and that's why it's residential property. The second type is industrial property. So these are usually properly and specially zoned properties that allow you to operate industrial or manufacturing businesses. And usually, because of the type of business, they're usually kept together because sometimes they can pollute, they can have heavy machinery coming on a regular basis, big trucks, all that kind of thing. So industrial property is usually put together and put away from residential property so that people's homes aren't disturbed. The third type is commercial properties. So these are where other general commercial properties and businesses are operated from. They can be standalone houses, they can be converted houses, they can be part of a body corporate, they can be part of an office building. But essentially, where any sort of commercial business is transacted from it is a commercial property. The next one is a rural property. So these are farms or other rural businesses that are operated from them. There are so many different rules in Australia and in other countries around the world that actually govern rural property. I'm not going to go into them, but if you've got a rural property you want to buy one, there are lots of special rules that you need to make sure you actually are aware of, because you're assumed to know all those rules. So if you're buying a rural property, then you need to make sure that you follow those. The last is retail shop property. So this is where it's like a retail shopping centre. And so in Australia and even in America and the UK, you've got Westfield, which is a large shopping centre conglomerate, and they have retail shop properties where all the retail shops are. And they, in countries like Australia, have unique challenges because there's special regulation that goes into those properties, and rightly so. They're there to protect retail shop owners from unscrupulous landlords. So there's all sorts of rules about those, and they can be anything from a small strip row of shops to a large shopping centre. So each of these property types, as I said earlier, presents a unique challenge. And residential is usually the most straightforward and it's the most commonly transacted. But you still need to make sure that you do your searches and you run through the process. And the process that Craig went through just before is the same really through all these different types of property. But you just need to be aware that depending on the type of property that you're buying, there will be different challenges and different things that you need to put in place for that property. So I'll talk about that more in due diligence. But Craig, do you want to talk about before you sign the contract?
Yeah, absolutely. So before you sign the contract, so it's a binding contract, and you remember when I went through the other process, that's along the way when you're actually signing it. But prior to that, you need to look at a few things, and one of those is the entity that when you offer a contract to the seller, what are you putting in as the buyer? So it's an important distinction, and you need to get it right to avoid a number of issues along the way. So this is where you'll be seeking the advice of your accountant and lawyer and other advisors about what entity the property should be in. So it really depends on your strategy and your investment strategy that you're putting in place with your consultant. So if, for instance, you wanted to buy the property for a negative gearing purpose, then that's going to change as to what entity that should be in, and it will need to be in your personal name to receive the benefits. Obviously, negative gearing is subject to change depending on the government in place at the time, but you need to consider all those sorts of things, and that's what your consultants will do. The other reason it's important is if you put it in one name as the buyer and you sign the contract and then want to change it along the way before you settle it, there could be double stamp duty implications here in Queensland, which you definitely want to avoid where possible. So it's very important to get the right advice, make sure you've got the entity in place that you want to purchase the property in and the reasons behind that, and then you want to put that down as the buyer when you're getting to the actual stage of signing the contract. So important to think about the entity. The other really important thing that you need to think about before you sign, obviously, is the actual price that you're going to pay for that property. So there's many ways to negotiate a price, and also you need to think about the conditions that are attached to that offer, not just the price. So there might be an offer there for $900,000 from one party, and they're paying cash, short settlement, no due diligence, for instance. And there could be an offer on the table from another party for, say, $950,000, but they have a number of conditions attached to that, along with settlement, various other conditions that need to be reached before the contract's unconditional. So the seller may consider that and say, well, I'm willing to take $900,000 on the basis that it's done quickly. So when you're making any offer, you've got to make sure that you also say what the conditions are associated with that, and you may be able to negotiate in relation to those conditions rather than negotiating the actual price down or up. When you're buying from the seller's point of view, they're going to be wanting to get the best possible price, and you want to also pay as little as possible as you can, so you can get a great investment. So there's a bit of a juggling act, but it's not a bad idea to think about the conditions that are attached to it. You might be able to negotiate with those rather than negotiating with the actual price. Obviously, you don't want to, you want to think about the price and have some reason for the price that you're offering, because you probably will be asked why you're offering this, etc., etc. So be ready to answer those sorts of questions. There's also the deposit. Again, this could be something that a seller may want a higher deposit, for instance. That could be a point that you could put in there for a buyer that might encourage them to accept your offer rather than someone else's. Just got to be careful with deposits in relation to instalment contracts. If the deposit's more than 10% of the purchase price, there's a number of things that happen there. for the buyer. So it's important, if you are thinking about that, to buyer to be aware of the instalment contract legislation and the case law around that. So think about that. Then probably the last thing you need to think about before you sign the contract is exactly where you're coming up with this money. Is it that you're borrowing it from the bank, you've got it in your own bank account, for instance, or you need to use the bank to basically leverage another property that you own. All those sorts of things take time to organise, and it's important to consider that before you sign the contract. You might sign it and say, yep, settlement in 14 days, and then realise you need to do a number of different things with the bank in order to get that money. That could annoy the seller, and certain things could happen if you can't comply with that contract. So it's important to have a think about where you're actually getting the money from before you sign it, and have those sorts of things underway, because most contracts are going to have strict timeframes on there. You can get extensions along the way. However, that's the seller may say no. For instance, if they've got another buyer out there floating around that's willing to pay some more money. So it's important to have a think about where you're actually getting the money from, and get all your ducks in a row to make sure that you can access that money relatively quickly, and hopefully get a smooth transaction once you've signed the property. So very important to look at where the money's coming from, obviously the price that you're paying, and the entity that you're putting down as the buyer. So they're the three main things you need to think about before you sign. Obviously there's a number of others, but they're the three main things that you absolutely must consider. Jeremy, do you want to finish up with due diligence?
Yeah, thanks, Craig. So due diligence is one of those funny terms. It doesn't really have a legal meaning, but it's kind of been accepted that due diligence is the term that lets a buyer of a property conduct all the investigations and searches that they need to do in relation to the property to make sure that they're comfortable buying that property. So what does that mean? Well, that really means looking at every aspect of the property, every aspect of every contract, every lease, every contract that might otherwise be in relation to the property, and making sure that you're happy with it as a buyer. So you also want to have a look at all the searches. So you do a bunch of searches when you buy properties, and you really want to have a look at those. So I'll run through some of those common ones. I won't go into great depth, but I'll just run through some of the most important ones. And the first one is a council local government search. So all areas have local governments and councils, and they have different rules and requirements as to what happens when a property is transferred. So you need to basically have a look at what those rules and requirements are, make sure that the zoning is correct for the property, make sure that all the things on the property, all of the buildings have been actually approved and have been built properly. So you want to check all of that stuff out, and as part of the conveyancing process, you should do that search. The next one is a title and a plan search. So in Australia and a lot of other places around the world, we have a system called the Torrens title system, which is how land ownership is recorded. And you want to make sure that those records are kept up to date and are actually accurate, and the person who's selling you the property is actually the person who owns the property. There's been some cases in Australia and other countries around the world recently where people have sold properties that they didn't own, and that can happen when someone doesn't do the right title search. The same with a plan. So the Torrens title system has a bunch of plans that are registered that identify where the properties are located, and you want to do a plan search to make sure that you actually are buying the place that you had a look at, because you should always have a physical inspection of the property. And so when you're buying a property, you do that physical inspection, and these are commonly building and pest inspection searches. So a building inspection is an inspection that's done to determine if the building is built to the appropriate standards and isn't falling down. A pest inspection is an inspection that's done to make sure that there's no pests, termites, or other vermin that are in the property that might cause you problems. If that happens, then you might either not want to proceed with the purchase, or you might want to look at having the purchase price reduced if that's something that can be negotiated. Another physical investigation that's often missed is a survey. So when you buy property, you can have it surveyed to make sure that the boundaries actually meet the plan. Now, this can be really important if you're not sure that the boundaries are correct, or if you think that a neighbour's property is overhanging your property. if this occurs, then you need to be really careful as to what the consequences of that are. In Queensland, once you've entered into the standard contract and this is found after the date, then often as the buyer, you can be actually liable to getting it fixed, not having the seller fix it. So be really wary of what is actually the consequence of doing a survey plan or a survey inspection, to make sure that you're getting what you're paid for. The last one is if you're buying a property, say, and I talked about different types of properties, commercial, industrial, retail shop, they'll often have leases in place for tenants. You really want to have those leases reviewed to make sure that you get what you're paying for. We've had plenty of cases where we've reviewed those leases and it's turned out that they're different or that they don't do what a seller said that they should do. So you want to make sure that when you're doing your review that you've got someone looking at them and that you read through them yourself to make sure that whatever the agent has told you is accurate. Now, these investigations might seem expensive. Often people do think that they're expensive, but ultimately, they're there to save you money in the long run. And if you've bought a property and your due diligence inspections have come up with no problems, well, lucky you, but that's the price you pay for the insurance of making sure it's done right. So due diligence is really important. You need to get the right advice and get the right people looking into it to make sure that it's done correctly. Otherwise, it can end up biting you really badly. So Craig, that's all I wanted to say on due diligence. I think that's everything for today.
Yeah, absolutely. And just expanding a bit on that point, Jeremy, obviously you're buying something that is most of the time very expensive and could be the most expensive asset that you have. So doing these sorts of things is important to make sure you're getting exactly what you think you're getting. So due diligence, absolutely important. So that is today's show for investing in property. We've gone through the process, obviously, the different types of property that's out there, the most important things you need to do before you sign it. And as part of that, once you've signed it, hopefully you've got a due diligence clause in there that's subject to, and you go through the things that Jeremy just spoke about. So that is show 173. If you would like to obtain the show notes for today's show, please go to the website. And show 173, and they will be there. If you have any questions or any input you want to do into the show, please let us know. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you're listening to the podcast, we appreciate your feedback and your reviews so other people can jump on and get the information that we share with our viewers and listeners. So, Jeremy, I think that's it for us today.
It is. We'll see everyone next week.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.